Cool.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
This is Running an Indie Games Cooperative. I'm Noah Magnolia.
And I am Sam Magnolia.
This is who we are. Just so you know, just at the top here, we will have a link to our slides, like a QR code for our slides at the end, so don't feel like you have to take pictures.
Don't worry too much about what's up there.
We're going to try to fly a little bit quick because we want to have a Q&A at the end, so don't worry too much. But yeah, so we're a part of a three-person games cooperative based out of Rochester, New York.
Our third prong is currently on a long working trip overseas, so he's not here today.
Yep. So we've been operating for about 6 years. We've shipped a handful of games. We do a large amount of client work, so that's a lot of where our stuff has ended up, and we've kind of contributed small parts to a bunch of different things. But some of our main stuff you can see up there, Mini Metro, Crazy Plates is one of our own, and Monster of Z2 was a co-development project. We have experience kind of cross platforms and working with different size teams in a lot of different contexts.
Yep.
So what is a cooperative? Actually, by a show of hands, how many people are aware of what like a cooperative business model is? Okay.
Oh.
How many of you people think it is like what REI is? Kind of a different cooperative. So a cooperative fundamentally is a business owned and controlled by its workers. That is kind of the core single trait that's shared by all cooperatives. Actual definition from the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives is worker cooperatives are value-driven businesses that put worker and community business or benefit at the core of their purpose.
There's all sorts of principles and different defining characteristics that you'll see around. But as we were kind of doing actual definitional research for this talk, there were three big main traits that we came across. All workers own the business, fundamentally. All workers share in the financial success of that business. And the operation and governance of the business is controlled democratically by the people who work within it.
Yep. So what does that, like, breaking that down, what does that mean, right?
What does that mean practically?
Yeah. One of the main traits is that there is financial equality within the cooperative. So workers have an equitable or equal share of ownership in the business, and they are paid equitably and sometimes equally. So depending on the co-op, members may elect to have an equal salary split across everybody, or they may choose to set salaries based on people's locations, roles, and contributions. There's all sorts of different, or just life circumstances based on their needs.
Something we'll come back to over and over again throughout this talk is that cooperatives are not monolithic by any means. Almost every one of them that is successful and longstanding does it very differently than one another. So trying to summarize these can get a little tricky, but just know that there's all sorts of different shapes and forms that financial equality can take. And it just depends on the industry and the business that you're talking about.
Yeah. A really important core fundamental thing, though, is that the workers are sharing ownership, and that can be, relative to people's contribution, or it can, again, just be equal. And ultimately, when you have democratic control of the operations of the business, then that's how you get financial control, and that's how you set these things kind of equally and in a way that everyone's happy with, right?
Yep.
Or at least everyone's equally upset about, because ultimately, when you're running a small business, especially in any space, you might not have as much money as you'd want, and so you're at least making the compromises together.
Yeah. Everyone gets a say in what that compromise looks and feels like.
Right, exactly. That kind of leans perfectly into the democratic control.
Right. Yeah.
Like I said, governance and operations are controlled democratically. It doesn't mean everything is voted on. It doesn't mean every single decision is voted on. This is a common misconception, and one that has led entire businesses to collapse.
Some people here are probably very familiar with an experience where it felt like every single person in the room had to vote on every single minutia, and it feels like it takes forever to get anything done. And that's frustrating to anyone and everyone. And so businesses that do democracy well and democratic control within a cooperative often find ways to delegate some of the decision making out of the group setting to help expedite things and leave room for people to do their actual jobs and all of the things that need to get done to keep the business afloat.
Right. So that looks like electing representatives to certain positions. We like to joke within ALA, like we give people C-suite titles.
We never use them, but we talk internally about like who would have the CFO title,
Right.
Because ultimately like that job still needs to get done somehow and by someone and not by all three of us all of the time.
Right. And then again, cooperatives members work together to decide what rises to the level of vote. And when those votes are held, that can, look like there's all sorts of different structures people have set up for kind of grouping those things so that it's not, okay, well, the business can't move forward today until we all sit down and have a vote.
Yep. So as we transition into talking a little bit more about what being a cooperative looks like for our studio and our experience, I'll give an example of working groups and committees. Yeah. So within our business, at the end of every year, we have to approve a budget for the following year. This is a thing that almost every business has to go through. Noah and I make up the Business Development Committee, which handles in part our finances. The Business Development Committee has been delegated to draft the budget. But then we have decided as a company that approval of that budget and execution of that budget has to be approved by all three members. So we've decided, hey, getting this drafted and working is, some of us, but all of us need to make sure that we are on board and that we sign it into existence. And that it can look like that. It can look, in different forms, but that's one example of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's cases within the budget even where we'll say, certain line items, we say this has to be just a unanimous agreement that we're going to make a purchase out of this budget, but we can just kind of go, okay, is there money in the line? Yes. Can we justify this purchase? Yes. Okay, great. Then we move forward. And then there's other budgets where it's like, okay, this is just part of the normal execution of whatever office within the team. And so that's just the money that we give them to work with annually.
Some people can just buy envelopes. That doesn't need approval, but buying
Right.
a new computer needs approval.
Right.
So talking more about kind of our experience as a team, we are a 3-person cooperative, as we said earlier. For us, all three members have equal ownership in the business. We also, since we all live in a geographically very, very similar spot, we all have roughly similar costs of living. So we have decided that we get equal pay. It's not relative to living or anything. Everyone gets paid the same salary and the same bonuses at the end of the year. This was established very early on through a very transparent conversation around needs and wants from our business experience. But we do revisit that conversation periodically because that's kind of the nature of our agreement.
Yeah, even for more transparency, we annually sit down together and basically go, okay, the current salary is X, right? How is that meeting people's needs? And what is your, Sam is very good, sends out a survey for us, is basically, what's the minimum amount that you need to continue doing this work and continue contributing to this business full time? And then what is comfortable for you? And then what is ideal? And so we try to find our way to somewhere between comfortable and ideal. But we've wobbled between minimum to comfortable, And
when we talk about everyone has to make compromises together, in years where we aren't making as much as we want, we have to look at that. What is everyone's absolute minimum? And how do we meet that for everyone? And in years where we feel more flush at the end of the year, work has been good, we say, how close can we get to ideal without compromising our ability to continue doing work 6 months into the future? That's a very tricky conversation and one that comes with a lot of experience. But the transparency means that if we all have to take pay cuts, we all agree that we need to take pay cuts and that there is equal buy-in for that.
Yep. And on that note, we all agree, especially being that we're a 3-person team. Two-person democracy would suck, or 3-person democracy would suck, because it's always just kind of somebody has a tie-breaking vote in situations where there's a disagreement. So we actually build consensus to make decisions as a team. If any decision that we make, everyone has to agree. If there's a disagreement, we have a conversation about it. We continue the conversation, and we try to find compromise. Luckily, everyone is trying to contribute in good faith, so there's no kind of no, it has to be my way. We're always willing to try to find a compromise that makes sense.
Consensus is not a model that works for every team. We are good friends with a different video game cooperative that we'll talk about in a little bit. They are a 26-person team. Consensus on a team that big is extremely hard and can be very tedious to build. And consensus sometimes doesn't work for an organization that big, or if it does work, you have to carve out a lot of time and resources to make room for that process. So this is another one of those circumstances where everyone's mileage may vary, and every cooperative will do things a little bit differently, but this is what has worked for us.
Yep. Finally, like Sam kind of touched on, we have some 2-person committees for some operations. We kind of jokingly call them committees, but it's really true that they are like focused working groups, basically. And, the idea is that we reduce strain on the other person that's not involved and kind of batch things, and also on the people involved, batching things together. Like Sam and I work together for a lot of the business development and kind of like financial oversight and decision making. And Aiden isn't so involved in that, so he doesn't have to worry about it. He just gets to agree on final decisions. We bring to him final budgets. We bring to him kind of final reports on that type of stuff.
Aiden and I also manage, as a separate committee where Noah isn't as involved, community engagement. So when we need to put up social media posts, when we need to talk about public-facing things, Aiden and I run through that sort of stuff together and only really draft it by Noah when it feels pertinent, when there's things that we've agreed everyone wants approval on. And that just means that Noah gets to spend a little bit more time doing all of the rest of Noah's work.
Yeah. And that's important. I think it's another trap that co-ops can fall in, is like everybody is constantly having to think about the big picture, and you don't want that necessarily. Like people still need to be able to work within their roles. And so you want to try to do your best to kind of put a box around and separate people around the big picture, because otherwise they're having to context switch out of their actual job. Yep. And finally, we have a 4-day work week set at about 28 to 32 hours a week. So, not a 40-hour 4-day work week. And that's just the type of thing that one day we were like, hey, let's try this. We all agreed to try it. And then we said at this date, we're going to reevaluate and see how we feel about it and how productivity and if the business is still solvent. And that day came and went. And we're like, yeah, let's keep going. And then, every year we look and we're like, yeah, this is definitely still working. This is something we want to continue.
Yep. Just so that we have time for Q&A, we're going to kind of speed through these last couple.
Absolutely.
So when it comes to being a cooperative, there are definitely particular difficulties that come along with that, as well as particular advantages. When it comes to difficulties, one of the big things that we've run into is that it can be really hard to access some of the resources that more traditional corporations can access. So for us, that has looked like city, state, and federal grants are really hard to get, because a lot of those require that you have an employee. And when everyone is a member owner or a worker owner, you technically don't have employees in the way that those grants can require, meaning that money is off limits to us, unfortunately.
For example, in New York State, you cannot have group health insurance without at least one full-time equivalent non-owner employee.
Yep.
So we cannot purchase group health insurance. Instead, we can give ourselves a stipend for buying our own on the marketplace, but we cannot as a business buy it together.
And speaking of getting money and resources, there are other non-governmental funding streams that aren't available to cooperatives for other reasons. So for example, if you've ever heard of, or if you're familiar with venture capital, what that is essentially a capital group will come in and offer to give you a certain amount of money in exchange for a certain ownership of your business. The problem with that is that co-ops are owned by the member owners, and often it is in the bylaws and it's structurally built into cooperatives that you can't have people who own the business who aren't working for the business, meaning that those two things are pretty mutually exclusive.
VCs don't tend to like co-op structures anyways, because they're not necessarily like big scale growth structures. Like the first question a VC will often ask you is, well, what's your plan to scale? How do you how are you going to employ people? And it's like, oh, well, every single one of them gets a stake. So
when we've talked with some VC types and we say that, we've been a 3-member business for 6.5 years, and we have no intention of scaling anytime soon, that tends to make some people uncomfortable.
It's usually a pretty quick conversation.
Yeah. Speaking of that, trying to keep with speed.
Yeah, we kind of hit on that.
Yeah. Scaling is really challenging because you can't just fire someone. They are now an owner of the business. There's often a more lengthy vetting process when you are bringing someone into a cooperative. And that can be challenging if you're trying to start up a team and you do need to bring people in short order.
Yep. Normally people will do like contracting for 6 to 12 months. That's normally an established policy of onboarding, basically. And then say, okay, at the end of 6 months, we'll vote whether we want to continue and bring you into the co-op.
When it comes to being a co-op, some people are turned off by the fact that everyone needs to be actively engaged in the management of the business. Some people just want to do their job and they don't want to have to actually like manage the business. And that is a requirement here.
And finally, the co-op structure does confuse and scare accountants and lawyers. So
Accountants don't like it at all.
Really don't like it, but you can make them work with you.
And then, you know, there are upsides for all of those challenges. There are reasons that we stick by it. One of them is that no one's surprised when we need to take pay cuts, when we need to, you know, we don't have layoffs, but when, you know, compromises need to be made, it's not a surprise to people. And that tends to also lead to a lot of buy-in.
Yeah. I think we can kind of skip through this because we touched on a lot of these, but encouragement and buy-in because everybody's equal at the table. Compensation and working conditions again. You know, worth noting, like you can mitigate burnout this way because you can do a better job of making sure people are well compensated and well taken care of and that you're having those conversations early rather than too late.
Burnout being a huge problem in the games development industry and taking care of our people being really, really important.
I don't know if y'all are aware of burnout. And then working hours, location, time off policy, all that stuff, again, contributing to the burnout stuff too.
Taking care of people. Cooperatives tend to be very labor forward, people forward businesses. It's inherent to the structure, but it's also, if you're running a cooperative and dealing with all of these difficulties, it's probably because you just care at a fundamental level, and that tends to lead to better outcomes.
Yep. So quick wrap up here.
Quick bullet points. You guys can read this later, but if you are currently running a studio that is not a cooperative, but you're interested in transitioning, it can be done. Feel free to come chat with us. And there are things to be taken from this talk, even if you are a part of or running a more traditional, you know, business structure. There's plenty to be taken from this, and we're happy to chat about that more.
You can even try some of these things within the context of teams rather than at the scale of your business.
Yep. But at a baseline, the more we talk about cooperatives and the more we talk about labor forward business structures, the more every single person in this industry and beyond benefits. So we encourage people to talk about it. It's really important.
Yep. And so that being said, here's a bunch of awesome links and resources. Again, we're going to give you a link to the slides in just a second. So definitely check those out.
Yeah.
And of course, please reach out to us. That one's down there at the bottom. So that's QR code for the slides if you want to go to the links and any of the slide decks. And then any questions, please come on up. We would love to get a little bit more into the weeds.
Yeah. Totally.
So how do you guys decide and balance raising everyone's salary at the end of the year if you have surplus versus like reinvesting that back into the company?
Totally. So for us, I'm actually working on this for next year. Right now, one of the things we look at is we have an agreement on how many, we call them months into the future of our budget, we hope to carry across into next year. So here at the end of the year, I can project that we're going to have, let's just say for round numbers sake, $100,000. And we have agreed that we want to carry at least 3 months of operating expenses in a next year. That would, you know, if our budget is $30,000, I would say, okay, we need to start 2025 with $90,000 because that's 3 months. That means I have $10,000 extra, right? Typically, that's not a huge margin. So I'm going to say, let's distribute that through bonuses and end of year purchasing. But if, you know, our budget's only $10,000, then we have $70,000 difference at the end of the year. And I can say either that means we have longer into next year, we have 10 months, or I can say that's a big enough margin that let's bump everyone's salary up $2,000 a month. And then here's how that will play out and shake out in the money.
I think also it's, in terms of literally like setting the salary, it's a balance between people's comfort level in terms of security for the business, personal security. Like we all have conversations acknowledging that, you know, we're ultimately all just small business owners and operators, which is something that you kind of learn to budget differently around anyways. And so, you know, it's like personal security, you probably have some months squirreled away. And it's like, how much do you need in the business salary to know for a fact that if we didn't have any work tomorrow, like, and funding stopped, like, how many months do we need to have to be able to make that transition? How do we, business development wise, how do we feel about that? And also individually.
When it comes to soliciting those numbers that Noah was talking about earlier, what is your minimum? What is your comfort level? What's your ideal? If you're curious what that looks like, we can chat afterwards. I'm happy to share that little survey format with anyone. I recommend starting there if you're running a team. But some people are or are not comfortable with that. So then you can just kind of fluctuate from wherever you're starting.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, please just come right up to the mic.
Yeah. Hi.
I was just curious regarding, you guys were talking about contracting individuals for your company. How often do you find yourself as an indie studio like doing contracting yourself, like sort of like trying to get in money from other methods by like spreading your guys out, like yourselves out to like go to different places and help them out?
So are you asking about how do we determine when we offer our services as a contract to other? Okay.
I would say, for the record, by the way, it's way more us working for other people than other people working for us.
Often we, in terms of when we do it and how we format it, we do it whenever we're kind of in between internal projects and need funding for our internal projects. We have a rostrum of people that we reach out to, and they tend to put us in touch with other people. Really, it comes down to the three of us have very different skill sets. And so some projects will only need one of us, and it'll be very clear who that is. Some projects need all three of us, or only two of us. And often if we get a request for work and we talk about it as a team and we're like, we want to do this project, they want to hire us, we then have the conversation around, hey, Noah, they primarily need your skills. Are you willing to take 6 months to work on this project while Aiden and I work on the internal thing? And it's really just a question of, Noah's able to say no, I don't want to work with them. That client has been kind of shit to talk with so far. And we'll make that agreement together. Is the money worth it? Is it not worth it? And just proceed as a team.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Totally.
Sorry, I came in a little after the start, so apologies for
No worries.
this. But I'm just curious if the decision making around the creative side of things is similar to the structure where you have these are the visuals committee where they're focused on the art style.
Yeah.
Or, how does that?
I can grab this one.
Totally.
Yeah, I think that within the context of creative work, I think it's much more important to give people specific responsibilities within domains. So to say Aiden, for example, is almost always a final executive decision maker on any visual calls or any kind of aesthetic or game feel type stuff. That's everyone can say, hey, I'd like to see this, or I have an opinion about this, but he's the one who makes a call if there's a disagreement, because there's almost certainly more creative disagreements than there are business level disagreements.
Similarly, I'm the producer for our team, so I run a lot of project management, timeline sort of stuff. I love getting feedback from my team about hey, what you set here doesn't feel good to us. But ultimately, I have the trust from my team that if I say no, it needs to be this way, that I'm gonna be respected for that professional experience.
We never want to only take a month for something, but sometimes we have to,
Yeah.
So yeah, we make sure that people are elected as in those positions. And so we just got the red flag. So unfortunately, I think we have to stop Q&A, but we'll hang around afterwards and take some questions.
We're happy to chat after the work.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks so much. If you want to come grab business cards or chat, we'll be here.
Yep. Thank you.